Void Hunter has always felt like it's supposed to be the classic RPG archetype rogue, but it hasn't really ever filled that fantasy. But I've finally feel like it's gotten to that point, and that's thanks to the rework to Gwisin Vest. Now I know Spectral Blade still has issues, I definitely agree there, but Gwisin Vest now has a neutral game perk that lets you generate a smoke cloud as soon as you come out of invisibility, and that gives you AoE weaken, which lets you more effectively loop your invisibility thanks to Stylish Executioner. So you can keep going into invisibility, come out, weaken enemies, stab them, go back into invisibility. Just like what I think a rogue should be. See here, enemies generally just can't find us because we are constantly looping that invisibility and we're just stabbing them. And what are we stabbing them with? Vexcalibur. Because that is one of the best glaives there is, and it can give you a really easy source of Overshield. And then when you have that Overshield, it'll have you do even more damage. And with artifact perks, we can take that damage to another level, so that glaives are very strong this episode. Even without those, this build works just fine. I actually don't have those artifact perks on in this video, and it's still doing just fine. And this is Legend Campaign, 15 power level under. See, we're just rolling through the enemies, you get a really strong weapon, we can auto reload it by meleeing, and then we can just take out these enemies. And we still have Spectral Blades to fall back on, which does some solid damage, not the best, but it's pretty solid, and Gwisin Vest will keep it up even longer. If that sounds good to you, let's get into it. I'm Engineer. Just going over the review, really want to embody that rogue archetype, so I want to be invisible as much as possible and stab enemies. That part was really important to me. I mean, you can always shoot enemies, but to me, I think it's even cooler if you're stabbing them. And with all the glaive reworks this episode, that's become even better than normal. So, use for this, general ad clear and objectives, getting invisibility a lot, being able to block a lot of damage is generally just good for those objectives or getting to your allies. So it will kind of fall behind on boss damage though. I've tested this up to 20 power level under. Now for the pros, weakens crowds of enemies, very easy to loop, good soloing. Now the cons, it's going to require Vexcalibur to really be survivable. You don't have a great source of consistent void overshields without that. Spectral Blade still needs love, especially for boss damage. The hit detection is still really frustrating. And then lastly, allies can break your invisibility loop. If they kill the enemy that you're trying to kill when you come out of invisibility, it can just break your loop. But we have some really good stuff in there to get our dodge back so that we can keep going into there and keep the loop going if that happens. Our exotic is Gwisin Vest. This is the main exotic for Spectral Blades. The neutral game perk is whenever void invisibility ends while you're near an enemy, it makes a snare bomb on the user. Now that is just like the snare bombs from your melee, count as melee damage, but it doesn't interact with Trapper's ambush. There's some cool things you can do there, but it's going to weaken enemies and it's going to deal a little bit of damage over time, disorient them a little bit, and just also do that melee damage to trigger a few mods and perks. The Spectral Blades part of it is when you do the heavy attack, you get super energy back based on the number of hits and kills. So just hit a lot of stuff and then mix in the heavy attack, and that's really it, and you'll get a little bit more duration. Not super complicated. This exotic's from Forsaken. You can get it from any source. Not too hard to get. You might have one already. Just due to time. Moving over to our aspects and abilities. The first aspect is Stylish Executioner. Biggest thing to mind here is that after you go invisible from this, there's a 2-second cooldown with a little buff associated with it called Too Stylish. So watch that in your buffs and debuffs area. A few things to note here. You get invisibility for 8 seconds by default. It goes up to 11.2 seconds if you have Echo of Persistence. While you're invisible, melee attacks will automatically weaken enemies, and I know that seems a little bit redundant with the smoke cloud, but this can be a little bit inconsistent, and the timing on it and triggering Stylish Executioner is a little bit tricky, so having that smoke cloud from Gwisin Vest actually is pretty helpful. Your normal melees will deal more damage, but the glaive melee has some other benefits to it and lets us scale a few things, so just keep that in mind. Our second aspect is Vanishing Step. This is just the easiest way to go invisible on top of Stylish Executioner. I really wanted to mix in On the Prowl here, but I just don't think On the Prowl is very good, and it's too easy to break your invisibility loop that way, whereas the dodge is very easy to get back, and you can just, when you're between enemies, you're about to start a fight, just dodge, go invisible, boom, you're good. Your super is Spectral Blades, because that's what works with Gwisin Vest, but the main thing we're actually working with here is neutral game part of Gwisin Vest, so in a pinch, if Spectral Blades doesn't work at all, you could use another super. For the grenade, I like Scatter Grenade or Magnetic Grenade because they have the lowest cooldown. Scatter Grenade tends to kill me less because you're so close to enemies, so that's good. Your melee is Snare Bomb. We actually won't use this a lot because we have a glaive out, but it's good as backup. It's one other way to get into invisibility because it weakens enemies. Now for the class ability, I usually take Gambler's Dodge just to make sure you have that backup invisibility, but as I said, you're not going to use the melee a lot. So if you want to take Marksman Dodge instead for the shorter cooldown, you can. On our fragments, we absolutely want to take Echo of Harvest. That will generate orbs and void breaches when we kill weakened enemies, which we do all the time. It does have a 10-second cooldown though, so keep that in mind. And then we're going to take Echo of Starvation. So when we pick up orbs or void breaches, we get Devour, and that will help give us survivability and grenade energy. Because we're using Devour, Overshield, and Invisibility, Echo of Persistence is extremely valuable here just to make all those last about 50% longer. Invisibility is only 40% longer, but that extra duration really helps, especially when staying invisible and trying to reposition carefully. And then lastly, I'm going to take Echo of Reprisal for super energy, because anytime you're surrounded by 3+ enemies, killing enemies gives you extra super energy, which is really good for roaming super build and just a semi-super focused build. That's really the only fragment I would maybe change out on this, and if you don't want that, some other ones to think about are Echo of Exchange, which give you grenade energy on any melee kills. They don't have to be powered melee kills. Echo of Undermining for weaken on your grenade if you need one more way to get into invisibility. And then, not listed on the chart on the right here, but Echo of Leeching will start melee regeneration when you get a melee kill, so that's another way to get a little extra healing. But between all the other ways we have to get healing in this build, I don't think Leeching is that necessary, but just figured I'd mention it. Moving over to our mods and armor stats. This is very odd, but one mod that I absolutely recommend on this is Focusing Strike on the gauntlets, because that will, as those smoke clouds hit enemies, it will generate class ability energy. Like most arm mods, there is a 7-second cooldown on it, but because you trigger this so constantly, it'll just make sure that your dodge is always there for you as you're doing your loop. Related to that, we're going to take Impact Induction, because that will do the same thing but for grenades, so just constantly getting grenades back. Then we're just going to generally do the normal, get as many orbs and as much super energy as possible. So we're going to take Ashes to Assets, we have a Harmonic Siphon. As we're using a roaming super, we're going to use Power Preservation, Firepower on the gauntlets, and then on the class item we will have Reaper, because we will use that dodge decently. And then beyond that, it's pretty stable stuff. Resistance on the chest, as much ability energy on the legs. I have Recuperation here, which you may not need because of the Devour procs, especially off of orbs, but a little bit of extra healing doesn't necessarily hurt. Over on armor stats, absolutely max out Resilience for that damage resistance. Discipline is one of the things that's going to be hardest to get up next. Try and get a decent amount of mobility. Recovery can be a little bit lower because we have so many sources of healing in this build. As always, intellect to 30, and then strength is the one that you can dump the most, because once again, we'll have a glaive out a lot of the time, and you can always get this back from your dodge. On artifact mods, we have a few that work really well with void. In column 2, we have volatile marksman. Most of this we won't be taking advantage of, but the boost on it will let volatile detonations give some amount of class ability energy. So that can be helpful too, just to make sure that dodge is up. In column 3, hold the line. Whenever you're near a few enemies, it will give you some stability and reload speed, and all your weapon kills will give you 55 HP. That is the same as a recuperation mod, and it includes the glaive melee, and that's extremely nice. In column 4, we have Maligned Harvest, which when you inflict volatile enough, release a weakening burst. So that can be extra helpful. But the most important thing here is that in a later part of this episode, we will get a boost to this that lets you get Void Overshield whenever you inflict Weaken, which is extremely good. Also in column 4, we have No Bell. So when you get glaive melee kills within a few seconds of each other, you get some ammo back. And then when you block damage with the glaive shield, you get 85% increased glaive melee damage for 6 seconds, which is crazy. So that's how you're going to do more damage against bosses or harder targets. Lastly, in column 5, you have a perk that when you kill weakened enemies with a void weapon, it will inflict volatile automatically, which is pretty easy to do with a void glaive. So just a pretty easy way to get volatile and get some ad clear out of that. On our weapons, first I like to start with a goal. So our goal is close range kills and survivability, because when we come out of invisibility, we want to be near enough enemies that smoke cloud can do its work. And because we're close to enemies, we need to be very survivable. So the best out of everything I've tested here is Vexcalibur. Gives you Overshield when guarding, and that Overshield is refreshable with melees. And because you're going in and out of invisibility a lot, you won't lose too much of that Overshield, and that Overshield will give you 20% extra melee damage whenever it's up, so very strong. The glaive will apply weaken thanks to Stylish Executioner, and it's just a really great loop. This is pretty easy to get, you just need to own Lightfall and do the Vexcalibur mission. There are a few catalyst perks you can put on this, all of them are solid, but I generally go with Grave Robber because then you just never need to reload it again because of how much we're meleeing. For other glaives, I recommend Close to Melee, which is a exclusive perk for glaives, but when you get a projectile kill with the glaive, it gives you 30% increased melee damage, which is pretty cool. You just shoot a weak enemy and then you've got a really strong glaive, especially stacked with that artifact perk. If you need something with this, you can get Ecliptic Distaff from the kiosk. This was a pinnacle weapon from past season. Another one is Forthcoming Deviance from Salvation's Edge, but that is a challenging raid and not everybody has that craftable. Now, if you don't want to use a glaive for some reason, you're missing out on a few perks, especially this episode, but shotguns are also good. And the main thing you want here is Repulsor Brace. That is one advantage that shotguns have over glaives, is we don't have a single glaive so far with Repulsor Brace, which seems like a big gap for shotguns that are recent and have this. A Sudden Death from Prophecy or Scavenger's Fate from Revenant are both solid. There's plenty of shotguns with Repulsor Brace though, so definitely look for those. And then another great one is Slayer's Fang from the exotic mission in Revenant. This can roll with Repulsor Brace, it has good range, it ricochets, it's just a really fun gun. So you can always think about using that too. It'll keep you close enough to enemies to get that smoke cloud, do what you want to. Now, just want to demonstrate with a longer gameplay loop here. This is the opening of Contest of Elders. I am, I believe, 10 to 15 power level under here. You can see the swords on the enemies, so definitely not too strong here. Invisibility is weird in Destiny, I will say, because the enemies definitely know where you're at, but it's just like they tell them you're not allowed to attack them, which works mostly fine, but it's just a little bit awkward. I wish they did a little bit better with that. But don't be afraid to use your grenade. It's great for the stronger targets, just to work them down faster. The glaive is pretty strong, but just you can't be standing around smacking things forever because that will kill you. One thing to mention here, and it's something I've been having to practice on, is while you're invisible, just guard. As long as you have any energy on the glaive, guarding will just give you void overshield after like a second. And you just want that overshield up as much as possible. Now, for most trash enemies, you don't need the damage boost from it. We're not really taking much damage here. You can see the smoke cloud just kind of disorienting enemies a lot. To run out of invisibility here, which is fine. Just finish off this enemy. Keep going. Now we've got a few stronger enemies here, so we're going to try and work them down. And we've got our super up already, so we're just going to use that to work out some of these crowds. Can't emphasize enough, if you're running a roaming super, run power preservation. It is fantastic. You'll make so many orbs. The orbs are not for you though, they're only for your teammates. So like in a solo thing like this, it's silly, but if you're playing with other people, it's just really good. This build's kind of nice and calm just because you get to line up your shots so much and just make sure you're stabbing the right enemy. Generally, if there's a crowd of enemies, stab the enemy that's in the center of it so the smoke can hit as many enemies as possible, and that lets you just be a little bit more flexible. And then just whack the enemy to death. Glaive melees were supposed to get a buff with this episode, so that the final hit did double damage. You can kind of see here the blocking ability of this. Like, if you deal damage, you just have a really long shield and you can block forever and just keep getting void overshields. And you can always just go invisible. Just shoot him where I used to be. And just beat up this little mini boss. Yep. You have to watch some awesome gameplay here where I missed so many grenade launcher shots. But this is not a grenade launcher build, so good to show this. Once again, just very underpowered and just standing here as a hunter tanking this, and then we're going to finish him off with the Spectral Blades. That's the part that annoys me most about Spectral Blades, is you often just go right past the enemy you're trying to hit and just waste a couple swings. The individual swings don't take a ton of energy, so it's not the end of the world, but something to keep in mind. there it is. So just to summarize that gameplay loop, you want to dodge for invisibility, get right into a group of enemies, stab or shoot to get a kill, go invisible. Wait like a second just to let that 2 seconds too stylish debuff to expire. And then while waiting, sometimes just block to build up an overshield, attack the next enemy. Every time you get a kill, it's going to reapply that overshield, but you can always reapply it while you're invisible. You have plenty of time there. And then when super is ready, just use this name for add, clear, or major targets. And that's pretty much it. Not super complicated, but enjoy your rogue fantasy, just going into invisibility and stabbing people in the back. I think it's really fun and kind of finally hit. I was surprised at how well this worked once I got all the pieces together, but yeah, it's pretty cool and it works in a lot of content. Just while I'm wrapping up, here's the build review again if you just want to look over it. As always, the dim link and the mobilitics link will be in the description. All these slides will also be linked in the description along with a link to the Destiny data compendium where a lot of this information comes from. As always, let me know if you have any questions in the comments. I love answering questions. If you have any other ideas, that's really great. I've realized that putting up a build video is one of the best ways to learn new things from other people because the community is great and has a lot of cool ideas and are not perfect. Once again, I always appreciate all the support and views and likes and subscriptions on these videos. Keep it up so that my channel can grow and I keep doing this more often. But with that, I'll let you go. Thanks. Have a good one.